Good morning or good day, everyone. I guess it's exactly noon. Hi. Welcome to Intro to Informational Interviews. I think the Eventbrite was called Mastering Informational Interviews. And I want to walk that back a little bit. This is really going to be focused on my approach to informational interviews and the way that they have really served me. And some of these tips are going to be, I think, really useful to everybody. But yeah, no, mastery, it's an ongoing process. So let's get into it. First of all, hi, I'm Sara Keats. So I was a comm lead. I'm a comm lead alum. I'm an alumni fellow this year, and I was part of Cohort 20. I'm currently a content design manager at eBay, and I genuinely love informational interviews. I think they are really great. So I'm going to start with just a little story. This is me. This is my picture that I use on the Comlead Fellow site. So you can connect the dots. I've had a couple different hair lengths recently, but that's me. And this is Jolene Tang, head of content design at eBay. And today, Jolene is my boss. And I thought I would just tell a little bit of a story about our history together and how we ended up working together at eBay. So in the year 2015, my boyfriend at the time who's an illustrator, was doing some illustration and freelance design work for an ad agency called Hey. And there was a account executive there named Jolene who was leaving for another role, and he thought I could be good for it. So he kind of introduced me, and that was the first conversation that we had. You're going to see a lot of screenshots of emails in this. They are not all perfect templates, but I wanted to be sort of real about how I have grown and thought about communication over the past almost 10 years here. I guess this was September, so 9 years, but anyway. So then I sent this a year later, I sent this like slightly creepy Instagram stalkery email to Jolene. I saw a selfie that she had taken in the bathroom at the WeWork at SLU. And I was like, you gotta meet my friend Lizzie, who also works at SLU. And I wanted to make that introduction. We had a nice little exchange after this. We got together for coffee and caught up. It was really great. A couple of years passed. I decide that I have this career in marketing, and I decide that I want to be a UX content designer instead. I reach out to Jolene on LinkedIn, seeing that she's in a content design role, and say, I would love to learn more about this role that you posted. I was very casual about it. As you can see, I say, to be honest, I'm pretty happy at Blink, which was my job at the time, but it looks interesting and I'd love to learn. I also know some playwrights and trainers that would be a great fit too. She says, yep, I'm traveling. We get to reconnect again at that point. Okay, then 2 more years pass. And I liked something of hers on LinkedIn. She says, how are you? How's it going? I say, how's life? Say, I'm actually interviewing with somebody that you introduced me to at Microsoft a long time ago. I'm trying to make this leap into content design. Whoa, good timing, because I might be hiring soon. Really a lucky LinkedIn exchange. And now it's 2024. I have worked for Jolene here at eBay for 3 years. I would think these cats kind of describe our relationship. I think I'm the small cat and she's the big cat mentoring me. And we're we are really close as colleagues. And she's a wonderful mentor. And it was kind of wild to put this together and realize just how long this relationship has been building. And you can see that a lot of points along the way were just informational interviews, touch base, what's going on. I have this very vivid memory of when I first wanted to make the switch into content design, so nervous, pacing around in my kitchen on the phone with her, asking her all these questions about Microsoft. So this is kind of the full timeline, right? There's lots of little blips and stops along the way, but I think this is one thing that is fortunate, a privilege of building your career in one place, right? We have each worked at lots of different places along this timeline, but we were able to stay connected and reconnect because we had some similar interests, and I asked her lots of good questions across informational interviews. I also want to talk about this period. So from really the year of 2020, a little bit into 2021, I did a gazillion informational interviews. Here's just some of that communication. So I'll just talk through a couple of these examples. Kat is a principal content designer at Zillow. I think I cold reached out to her and just said, I lead a marketing team at a UX firm and I'm in grad school and I'm trying to make the leap into content design. can we talk about it? We had a great conversation. Kat went ahead and introduced me to Emily and a couple other people that she knew within Zillow. Another example over here, connecting awesome content designers. My friend Laylee and I had worked together at a UX agency. I had told her that I was trying to make the switch into content, and she introduced me to Tracy, who at the time was at Meta, is now, I think, at TikTok, and is a connection that I've sort of kept up in touch with since then. Tori was a comm lead fellow while I was in the program. I had an informational interview with her about her experience moving into content design and how she got her job at Microsoft. She's now like changed paths a couple more times and is currently a product manager. But I had a great conversation with her. She referred me to Sonal, her colleague at Microsoft, who then connected me to a bunch of hiring managers. I did a bunch of loops at Microsoft. I didn't get any of those jobs. There was a typo in my portfolio. It was very embarrassing. I will not show you the rejection email because it's like so silly that I didn't catch some of these typos. But I show this to sort of tell you, like, there's a lot more noise than this direct path of this direct path that you see here, right? Like, this is actually a much more squiggly line that I've just sort of like straightened out to illustrate one example of that. So let's talk about a little bit more about me, and then I promise we'll get into more of the content. I want to acknowledge at this point in the presentation that I have lots of privileges that make informational interviews pretty accessible to me. I am a white cis lady. I grew up in a class that makes me feel like pretty comfortable talking to just about anyone. I have this like mid-Atlantic, quote unquote, unaccented English thing in the way that I speak. I'm very extroverted. I was captain of my improv comedy troupe. Like, I'm very comfortable in these spaces, and a lot of that has to do with intersecting privileges. But there's also a lot of work, and the work is the thing that I think is accessible to anybody. This is the stuff that we can teach. You can lean in and do a bunch of research. You can do really thoughtful prep and notes. You can write thoughtful emails. You can follow through and make things happen for yourself with your dedication and your persistence. And anybody can learn the kind of active listening that I think is really important to make an informational interview successful. But I do want to point out that, like, there are things about this that are just easier for me because of my life up until the moment that I had the informational interview. And I'm excited for everybody here to start thinking about what are some of the things that are unique about you that could serve you in these contexts. So with that, here's what we're going to talk about today. That preamble was a lot about me. First, we're going to talk about the what and the why. What is an informational interview? Why is it useful? Then I'll talk to you a little bit about my process for informational interviews. And then we'll go into some breakout rooms and do a little bit of practicing, because practicing makes it all a lot less scary. Before I get into that, does anyone have any questions? That was a quick thing. You can also blow them up in the chat, and I can circle back to them later. Great. Let's get into the what and the why. So what are informational interviews? What informational interviews are and why they matter? Let's talk about it. So an informational interview is a conversation where you seek information, not a job. And maybe you came to this because you're like, okay, but like, I want to network so that I get a job. What is the story with that? You told a whole story about how your informational interviews landed your job at eBay. So there's no doubt that like career advancement is part of the story here. But I think when you go into an informational interview, your top mind priority, the top priority has to be about learning something. You have to have great questions that are not just transactional, but actually like generative. So why should you do them? It's great to do an informational interview to gain insights into a specific role, industry, or career path. This really served me when I was trying to change careers. You can do them to build connections and expand your network, right? You're meeting people, you're forming genuine connections with them. That's a much better network than just following a bunch of people on LinkedIn. And you also do them to hear other people's stories. And the key thing that you're contributing to this is your chance to refine your own, right? If you do 15 informational interviews and you are going to hone the pitch about who you are and what you're looking for, so much more finely than in the like high pressure environment of a job interview, right? You get to like say, hi, I'm Sarah. I am a content designer by way of a background in theater and then marketing. Let me tell you my story. The keys, I think I sort of have alluded to this in the voiceover already, are curiosity and gratitude, right? If you are genuinely curious and genuinely gracious, people will notice that and be more inclined to be a part of your career path going forward. Let's talk about what this means in terms of questions. A good question in an informational interview would be something like, I'd love to hear about your career path. How did you get where you are today? A bad informational interview question would be, how did you get this job? And do you have one for me? Let's talk about why this bad one doesn't work that well. It is, first of all, if you lean on the you that hard and how did you get this job, there's something sort of like accusatory about it, right? Like it implies like, are you even sure you belong here? Assume that everybody that you're talking to is exactly where they're supposed to be, and that curiosity will feel more genuine and just be a more like positive exchange. And do you have one for me? Look, they may, if they bring it up and they want to talk about a specific role in the team, certainly you can follow them there. But I think that it's engaging in bad faith to ask someone for an informational interview and then try to turn it into a job interview. So now let's talk about how to set up and conduct informational interviews. This is a little bit about the process. So the first step is to identify potential interviewees. You might do this by searching LinkedIn by job title, company, industry. I personally sort of like to filter for location. With Zoom, you're able to talk to anybody anywhere, which is very cool and opens up a lot of opportunities. But you can see my career has been very Seattle centric. I tell people I moved here for a 1-year internship 11 years ago, and now it's now. Another way to find professionals is you might check alumni directories and professional associations, right? Depending on what you're interested in, there's probably a professional association that works for you. One of the connections that I had in my sort of collage and the introduction, my friend Laylee knew Tracy, the content lead at Meta, through Hexagon UX, which is like a women in UX organization in the Seattle region. And then you can also utilize industry events or networking events or networking sites, right? Some of this is happening digitally. Some of this happens in person. I know this morning was the monthly Creative Mornings meetup, which is like a great place to go and learn and think about what people are doing in your space. Sorry, I got really distracted because I noticed there's a watermark on this image. So tacky of me. I thought I downloaded it the right way, but it's fine. So the next step is to make contact, right? You want to craft a thoughtful email or LinkedIn message. Be concise, professional, and specific about what you're seeking. Introduce yourself and explain why you're interested in their experience. Be clear about the next steps, right? You're either going to request a meeting time or propose times that work for you. Depending on what your calendar looks like, you might use a tool like Calendly, or I think Google has their own internal version of it now, where you say like, hey, click the link to book a time with me, right? That makes it really easy. And if it's relevant, reference a shared connection, their work, or recent achievement. Maybe you saw on LinkedIn that they just launched a huge campaign that they were really proud of. And you could say, I really admired your work on that, so I wanted to reach out. Just a little bit of storytelling about why you want to talk to them goes a really long way in making this feel, again, not transactional, but generative. So next, you want to prepare for the interview. I want to talk about this image first. If you're familiar with the concept, I think it's, I want to say it's mise en place, but I don't speak French, so it's dangerous to put that in the speaker notes. But it's basically, I think this is eventually going to be like a poke bowl. I don't really know. I was like, what has fish and also grilled onions, or sorry, grilled mushrooms, and dragon fruit, I think. Anyway, whatever food this is, they're ready to make it because they have everything prepped. I have a little post-it note on my desk that says, plan your work and work your plan, right? If you go in with a great plan, it's going to make the whole interview go so much easier and be so much more effective. So how do you prepare for an informational interview? First, do some research on the interviewee, review their LinkedIn profile, the company website, look at their recent projects. Depending on the role they're in, they might have their own portfolio site that you can get access to. You want to know enough about them to ask informed and thoughtful questions. So that brings us into the question list, right? Write down the questions that you want to ask in the order that you want to ask them. This is really key if you're not as sort of extroverted and on the fly as I am. My husband's doing a series of informational interviews right now and is like very introverted, and he has the same like order of questions that going into every single conversation. You want to keep these questions focused on the individual's career journey. For example, I like to ask, what does a typical day look like in your role? Or what do you enjoy most about your job? Less about company strategy or sort of big decisions that may or may not be part of their remit, and more about what the actual day in a life of their career is like. You also want to be prepared to speak a little bit about yourself, right? You might say, I'm a graduate student. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about copywriting. It doesn't need to be a whole pitch. You just want to give them enough context that they can answer the question in the context of what you're looking for. So then host the interview. I say host the interview rather than conduct the interview because I really think it's helpful to think of yourself as the host. You have invited them and you want to help create a good experience for them so that you can get the most information out of the conversation. So reintroduce yourself. Remember, people are often doing a lot of context switching throughout the day, especially if you're going to do it on Zoom and they were like in a meeting before and they're doing a presentation after, or they were heads down doing some work in a Google Doc. Sometimes, like, especially in certain corporate environments, at least I can speak for my job, I'm jumping from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. So it can be really grounding to start and say, hey, thanks again for reaching out to me. I really appreciate you taking the time. Just a reminder, I'm in this Comm Lead program at the University of Washington, and I really wanted to talk to you today about your career in UX writing, whatever the case may be. When you start asking questions, I think start from an open-ended place. Show curiosity, pay attention, and ask relevant follow-up questions. This is where you have to be comfortable deviating from the script because it shows that you're actually engaged, right? If I say, tell me about how you got into UX writing, and they say, oh, it's actually this wild story. I started doing UX writing when I was back at the circus. I want to ask a follow-up question to understand what they were doing at the circus, right? I don't want to just march through my questions and tick each one off. I want to have a conversation. This is one that's really important to me. Be aware of time and don't exceed the scheduled length. If you ask for 30 minutes, wrap up at minute 25. If applicable, if you're meeting out or you're in person, I think it's nice to treat for coffee or a snack. You know, depending on how many informational interviews you're doing, this could be an expensive endeavor. So it's sort of an optional one, but especially if somebody takes the time to travel to meet you in person, it can be really nice to say like, hey, I got this. Like, do you want a latte? I'm going to get a Rice Krispie treat. What do you want? You can tell I'm hungry. Like maybe a Rice Krispie treat is a weird choice to eat in an informational interview. How would you take notes? Your hands would be so sticky. Don't get a Rice Krispie treat. Okay. End the conversation by asking for a referral to someone else that you should meet. I think this is a great way to build your network really organically, rather than sort of like the lead gen spear phishing of typing into LinkedIn or just going off search. Ask people to leverage their network to help you. More often than not, they'll have somebody that is doing a different but related job that will be great to talk to, or someone else in their field that just has a different experience. Just by way of an illustration here, if somebody came and talked to me about UX writing and content design, and over the course of the conversation, it was like, you know, you might actually want to be a UX researcher. I feel like you'd be really interested in doing that sort of like qualitative usability testing and foundational research. I know a ton of UX researchers that I would love to introduce them to. So it's a great way to do sort of that cross-functional networking as well. This is also important, follow up with a note, right? It's really important to send a follow-up email. If they really go above and beyond, if it's like a long conversation or you learn something really groundbreaking, a handwritten note sent to somebody's office is also really classy, but an email is usually, an email or a LinkedIn message will usually suffice. Keep it simple, professional, appreciative. If you can, reiterate a key takeaway. If you forgot to ask for a referral or an introduction, you can do that in the email as well. Sometimes it's easier for people to follow up via email with that rather than just naming someone off the top of their head. But don't sweat it if they decline, right? Some people don't want to impose on folks in their network, and that's totally okay. In fact, if every single person that you talk to refers you to 2 more people, you'll soon have too many people to talk to. I also think that following up is nice because it sets you up to maintain a relationship. You can connect with them on LinkedIn. You can check in periodically with updates or questions. I think it's great to follow up with specific things you learn, like the launch of a big campaign, or if you change roles, anything that you're sort of talking to them about that relates to a goal. If you meet that goal or if they meet that goal, that can be a great moment. Again, just by way of example, like this, me putting together this presentation is a great moment for me to reach out to all of those people that I talked to back in 2021 with an update. Hey, I was thinking about you. I did this presentation to my graduate program about the importance of informational interviews and was reflecting on how generous it was that you met with me. It made a huge impact on my career because now I've been a content designer at eBay since we spoke, basically. I think thinking about the relationship and thinking about the story makes those check-ins organic, in a different way than like, okay, I checked my calendar and like it's my Q4 time to email a bunch of people, right? You want it to feel, you want it not only to feel genuine in a fake way, you want it to be genuine when you think of people, reach out to them. Okay, thank you guys for those reflections, and I encourage you to kind of keep thinking about it. We're getting fairly close on time, so I'm gonna just do a quick plug for some other stuff coming up in the CommLead cinematic universe. So Lynn Juvet, I think that's how you say her name, I'm not positive, has a workshop coming up next week. I really, really recommend this. In a workshop with Lynn, she really encouraged me to just sort of like stop sending resumes into the ether of LinkedIn and really invest in network building. I think that's much easier said than done, but she's got some real tips. So I think that'll be a helpful conversation. That's also on Zoom. We got our first Fridays coming up on the search for internships. And then if you are like, oh, you know what, this informational interview stuff makes me think about interviewing in general, there's a 2 or 3 credit course coming up in winter quarter, that will be specifically on engaging interviews, which sounds like a good one. I did not take that. I don't know if they had that when I think they had it my last quarter. But anyway, sounds like a good one. Potentially one I may audit, so maybe see you there. And yeah, so that's what's coming up. And then a little bit about me. So I'm sarakeats.net. There is a sarakeats.com. It's a different Sara Keats. You can hit me up via email. That's my email address. And you can always find me and lots of other great alumni fellows who have already signed up and are already interested in networking with you and having conversations with you, at the CommLead alum page, CommLead website alumni page. So yeah, thank you all so much for the time. If you have a minute, got this email address here. Any sort of feedback, reflections you have on this presentation would be great. I'm thinking about turning it into an article for LinkedIn. And so what resonated, what seems totally off base to you, all that kind of feedback is really useful. So yeah, I would really appreciate your thoughts. Thank you so much for taking the time and have a great weekend.